Hello, and this is part 3 of how your diet affects biodiversity. So in part 1 you did a food chart. In part 2 you substituted out a protein for another kind of protein. And now you are going to draw a model of how changing your diet can affect Earth's biodiversity. So let's talk about that real quick. So you can draw a model, and again your drawing just has to be stick figures if nothing else. And then you're going to have a caption. So let's look at how that happens. So how your diet affects biodiversity. Make a model that shows how changing your diet can affect Earth's biodiversity. So let's talk about this. Let's say that you're a beef eater, all right? And so what happens is when you eat beef uses a lot of grain to grow it because they're pretty big animals. And so a lot of grain is used to grow 1 kilogram of beef. Whereas if you're eating pork, less grain is growing to feed 1 kilogram of pork, and even less for chicken. So by changing from eating beef to chicken, less grain has to be grown. All right. So biodiversity has to do with bio, life, diversity, many different forms. So if you are growing a whole bunch of grain, that's only one form of life. So as people grow more beef, there has to be more food, and so more food means that more land is diverted from making other kinds of plants into using just one kind of plant, grain or corn or something like that. So it becomes what we call a monoculture, where you're only growing one type of thing to feed another type of thing. All right, so changing your diet, going away from beef to maybe chicken, you're putting less pressure on the environment to grow one type of thing, growing more than one type of thing. Let's clarify that thought a little bit more. So another one is beef, the environmental impact on beef. So when you're growing a bunch of beef, and this is only 1 pound of beef, to make 1 pound of beef, you need this much water. You need to destroy this much rainforest, 55 square feet. 16 pounds of grain has to be diverted, and you produce 80 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And that isn't even talking about the methane that the cow probably burps and farts out, which is another greenhouse gas. So again, raising cows uses up a lot of natural resources, water, rainforest. Cutting them down destroys biodiversity so that you can grow grains, or so you can raise your cattle instead of having that forest. So environmental impact, you are destroying biodiversity by cutting down the rainforest, or by diverting water, or again by having a monocrop of grain instead of diverse plants. So again, saying this, eating beef and hamburgers, rainforests are being burned, and they're being burned so that they'll go away so that you can use that land for doing beef. Why? Money. Cows are a big cash crop, and so by raising beef you are going to make more money than that rainforest that's sitting there. Or you may be using that rainforest to raise crops that then can be fed to the cows. So if we look at causes for deforestation in Brazil, right, most of the cause is cattle ranching, 65 to 70%. Then there's small scale agriculture, and again that agriculture might be a monoculture where they're raising soybeans or corn so they can have a market for the cattle, or large scale agriculture, and then there's logging. So you can see share of deforested land ultimately converted for extensive agriculture. In 1980s it was 80%. That has dropped to 60%, and that's because again they are using more of that land for cows. So we have this stark picture where we have our what used to be rainforest, and now it is cattle ranching because it was burned and now it's changed into a cattle farm. And then you have your rainforest on the other side, which is what they're burning. Or they're logging the rainforest, and then they use the logged area for cattle ranching or for crops. Other things we're worried about, again, the dangers of a monoculture is if you only have one kind of plant grown in an area, all right, well, there are things that might have lived on that plant, or there are things that are pollinating that plant. Well, when you only have one kind of plant, there's only one kind of pollen the bees are getting, and this can lead to health problems for the bees. So bee harvest loss, where bees were bee collapse syndrome, where bees were being just dying off. They didn't know why. One of the reasons, I think, is because bees are being taken from place to place, but they are only getting pollen from a certain type of crop at a certain time, walnuts or almonds or soybean, and so that the bees aren't as healthy because they're not getting a diversity of pollen. This is also true with butterflies. When you are putting in a monoculture, you are taking out some of the plants that they need to feed on. And so with the monarch butterfly, specifically milkweed used to be everywhere in the Midwest. Well, because of urban or mass farming, they've cut out the milkweed, they've killed it with DDT, and now the butterflies just have nowhere to eat, and so the monarch butterfly population is decreasing. So that is affecting biodiversity. Again, the whole point of this is, how does your diet affect biodiversity? Well, by eating things that depend on crops or monocultures, it's affecting the biodiversity of bees, it's affecting the biodiversity of insects, it's affecting the biodiversity of plants. So hopefully that gives you enough background information so you can quickly draw this, and you can go off and try to spark some interest or spark some ideas. So how can your diet affect biodiversity? And you can do this as a positive or a negative if you'd like. You can do it as a positive, as in changing your diet to affect biodiversity in a positive way, or you can do it changing your diet to affect biodiversity in a negative way, because some people do that. Instead of eating less meat, they're going to eat more meat, or they're going to eat more things that would cause biodiversity to go down. Either way, draw it and put a caption. The important thing is that you get the idea, and then you make your own choices from that. If you need any further assistance, please see your science teacher.